Welcome to episode 215 of Silver Lining for Learning. With me are Lydia Cow from the University of Toronto, Kurt Bonk from Indiana University. I'm Chris Dede from Harvard. Those are the co-hosts who are with us today, and then our guests, Jenny Taylor and Nick Espinosa, who will introduce themselves shortly. We're very excited about the show because we view lifelong learning quite seriously. We don't believe that learning ends at the end of K-12 or learning ends at the end of higher education or even continuing education. We see it as a lifetime endeavor, and a lot of it takes place informally outside of the formal educational settings. I was fortunate enough to get acquainted with Goodwill, North Georgia years ago and was so impressed by what they did. And finally, I thought, well, we should have them on Silver Lining for Learning to talk about the model, which is both making a big difference in its own region and also serving as a potential model for others who might want to do something similar. So with that as an introduction, Jenny, I'll ask you to tell us about yourself and about the role that you play with GNG.
Well, first, thank you so much for having us today. I'm delighted to know you and to learn from you as in that lifelong continuing learning. I always have such a good takeaway of something new every single time we talk. So first, just thank you. I'm Jenny Taylor. I'm Vice President of Career Services and Chief Mission Officer for Goodwill of North Georgia. And what that means is all of those things that people associate with a thrift store that is a very well-known brand, the social enterprise that's been around for 120 years, is my job to fulfill the mission of. And we are doing that for people who are vulnerable, marginalized, may have barriers to employment, and people who are just looking for a new job. So everyone from perhaps a burned out professor who wants to try something new, we do have those occasionally, but the primary group of people we serve are people like veterans returning into civilian life and work, people returning from justice impact and incarceration, people with lifelong attachment to public benefits and generational poverty, people with disabilities. All of those groups that you might consider might need some extra help with employment, which of course includes learning new skills, upskilling, working on some work behaviors and that kind of thing. And I've been doing it now for almost 25 years. I accidentally fell into it and have found that it's my purpose and passion. So I enjoy it very much. And then my friend Nick has, we've been doing some good things. My former boss, when she met Nick and started learning about what we were doing, said, well, the two of y'all are going to change the world. And so he remains, even though he's not in the same role, has been promoted, remains a sounding board and partner in many of the things that we do at Goodwill, but also personally. I just find that he's a great sounding board. So Nick, tell us about yourself.
Right. First of all, I just want to echo what Jenny said. Thank you for inviting me to the conversation. It's an honor to be invited and to have an opportunity to give you a little bit of perspective, at least, from outside of Goodwill of North Georgia. So again, my name is Nick Espinosa. I am currently the branch chief for technology, nutrition, and integrity for the USDA Food and Nutrition Service Southeast region based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Our region comprises 8 states. We go all the way up north to Kentucky. We go west to Mississippi and south to Florida. So those 8 states. We administer nutrition programs. We operate 16 of them at FNS, of which the largest one is SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. For some of us old timers, people still call it food stamps. But we also administer things like the National School Lunch Program, WIC, and others. Within my role, I actually belong within the SNAP division, And my responsibility is to oversee 7 sub-programs that have to do with technology systems in the states to determine eligibility for SNAP and to administer sub-programs like nutrition education and outreach. Also, we also handle the EBT program, which is the mechanism through which individuals, low-income individuals that are on SNAP actually receive their benefits. It's basically a debit card. And we also administer disaster operations. As a matter of fact, right now we're in the middle of finishing a disaster operation of the impacts of Hurricanes Helene and Milton, which were pretty devastating here in the Southeast. And those programs are going to continue on until the week prior to Christmas. But my role prior to this one was as the regional SNAP employment and training program analyst. And in that role, we collaborated. We operate and oversee the program at the federal level through the states, but the actual work is actually done through partnerships like the one that the state of Georgia has with Jenny and Goodwill of North Georgia. And that's how we became acquainted and our work began. But officially, I have to put on the record that obviously I'm here as a private citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of the USDA.
Well, I'm struck by, Nick, the link to food, because another podcast that I'm part of is for an initiative called the Digital School, which is out of Dubai, but active in 8 countries. And in Egypt, the Digital School's closest partner is a food program, because they get the students to come because food is available as part of the schooling. And in many cases, it makes a huge difference in those students' lives to have access to food.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there's part of the reason for the partnership is if there's sort of a whole person dimension here where you're not just concerned about the cognitive part of learning skills, but you really are looking at the overall context that these students are operating in.
That is precisely what we're doing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I say this all the time, especially in my previous role, that the best intervention, the best mitigating factor for food insecurity is a job, a good living wage job. And that's what the SNAP Employment and Training Program does, is that it encourages, provides best practices and technical assistance to states to do more with SNAP Employment and Training to connect low-income individuals with good paying jobs so that they can transcend poverty.
And it really is that going from survival mode to stability, which is what the food and nutrition does, and then success, moving them towards self-sufficiency, career advancement, the career pathways that are going to do what we call our ABCs, a first job, better job, career. And so often, I believe why I found my purpose, so often the work that we're doing and really thinking about it holistically, a job and the dignity of having an answer, certainly in America, to what do you do, which is often the first question, a good answer, is not only elevates how they feel about themselves, but what they can do for themselves and their families. And we provide all of the barrier removal, like making sure they have food and shelter and transportation and clothing and books and uniforms and all of the things that might prevent somebody who is really motivated to work, because that's the only criteria to get help from our agency is motivation to work. If you don't want to, there's nothing we can do to compel you to because you're checking a box for somebody who is requiring you to do it. We'll check the box that they came, but we don't invest really until they're really show that they are motivated. But everything else we can overcome.
Bert.
Yep, so I have a couple of questions, and I think I need to ask the second one first, and we can hold off on the first one, because I think that's going to be a longer conversation, and it's a very important one, I think, for this show. But let me ask the second one, and that has to do with what Nick talked about with disaster operations, because there's been so many catastrophes over the past decade. We repeatedly are seeing things, 2 decades with Katrina, we repeatedly see things in the news, read it in the paper, hear about it in podcast shows like this one, about what's going on operationally for a few weeks, maybe for a few days, and then really things finally hit the ground running on where it happened, and we never hear about what actually went on. I'm curious. I would like to know what kinds of things happen in disaster operations that you've been a part of, or you've observed, or that are very important for the people that you serve. So we can get a sense of that, so people can be better aware of the long-term nature of the relief programs and what specifically happens for people, both economically, educationally, financially, or psychologically, whatever. Nick, could you tell us a little bit more about that aspect?
Sure, thank you. And I don't often get asked questions about disasters. It's not a it's not a very palatable topic to speak about disasters. And luckily, we don't get very many here in the Southeast because of their geography. We do usually experience at least a severe tropical storm or a hurricane every year, but those are becoming more and more frequent, as you were saying, Kurt. So for disaster operations at the federal level, a lot of that happens through another agency, through FEMA. However, within USDA, as I said before, we do administer 16 programs. And within those programs run the gamut, as I said before, from SNAP all the way through our commodities programs. And usually when there is a disaster, there is a requirement for a presidential disaster declaration. And once that is issued by the president, states can come to us and submit requests, waiver requests from the normal rules that our programs use to operate a disaster operation, which usually means that it is more streamlined, and it allows the states more flexibility to actually deploy resources and services to folks on the ground. So for USDA, usually that begins with the commodities programs, where states ask us to open up USDA warehouses and USDA foods so that they can be accessed through local feeding sites, schools, mass feeding locations, food banks, etc. And that is usually where the disaster operations start. So for example, in this particular case with Hurricane Helene in Milton, landfall for Helene was September 26th. And those programs are usually stood up within a week or two of that
Wow.
that happening. So we need to make sure that there is infrastructure underground, those feeding sites, that they're able to accept those foods, that they're able to refrigerate them and store them, and then be able to distribute them. So that's why there's a little lag of time between the actual disaster, the disaster declaration by the president, the request from the state, and then the release of commodities to the states. SNAP in our world in USDA usually comes in at the very tail end. And that is a program where individuals that are not currently receiving SNAP benefits can get a 1-month emergency allotment. And that is usually based on where they live, making sure that the disaster declaration issued by the president covers the counties where they reside. And that, again, there's infrastructure there for people to be able to store food, to be able to refrigerate it, for them to be able to shop at sites, that supermarkets are up and running, etc. And that usually takes longer. That usually starts about a month after the disaster actually hit. And that's basically what we've been doing this year. It's been pretty unprecedented. As I said before, we usually get one hurricane a year that impacts maybe one state, maybe 2 states. In this particular case, we had 5 states that were impacted: Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And they have been operating those disaster snaps, we call them DSNAP, programs since the very end of October. And as I said, they're going to end probably the week prior to Christmas in Florida. And again, states have to stand up these programs. They have to identify sites. They have to communicate that, disseminate the information out in the media, inform folks, get those folks to come in to apply. There's a more streamlined process to apply for those benefits. And then they receive that 1-month emergency allotment. So in a nutshell, that's how it operates, and that is how we contribute to the overall recovery of an area that's been impacted by a disaster, whether it's natural or man-made.
And so some of these last years, if not a decade, like Maria in Puerto Rico, we had a Puerto Rico show on a year or two ago, and they're still recovering from that. But they've had other catastrophes since then, and tropical storms and whatnot. But they're still just getting back to the way things were, or trying to. Here we are 7 years later. I'll ask the second question later on, Chris, Lydia. You guys want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to jump in. First of all, I just want to say I really admire the work you're doing. Like your work is really changing the life of others and empowering others to have a better life. I think that's just such a great mission-driven work and a role to be in. And my question is related to this hybrid model that you transitioned into during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more about this hybrid model of upskilling, reskilling, and lifelong learning?
Certainly. So, we talk about disasters like a hurricane that hits suddenly and take out entire swaths of infrastructure. And that's an example, just like the pandemic is an example of a short-term immediate need so that you're getting people safe. And you're getting that Maslow's hierarchy and needs taken care of, that they're safe, they're eating, they have clean water, and then they can begin thinking about, oh, well, my workplace is shut down and I can't, or a school is shut down. And so we have endeavored to always try to reach people who couldn't come in because of transportation issues or because of awareness. People think about Goodwill, for example, as a thrift store, not as a place to get all of those other things. And because we're one brand nationally, but each implement local programs, sometimes it's not the same service. So an example for Helene, our sister Goodwills in other parts of the state, in Valdosta and in Augusta, were totally shut down. And they themselves went into disaster recovery for their own team members, but also because they had no power and some of their buildings were damaged, but also for the community, because they did have a reputation for having opportunity centers and career centers to be able to help be a site, because we have, big open spaces with big parking lots and big infrastructure that if we can get a generator there, we can make it available because the public is used to coming there. So while we're not the Red Cross and we're not the USDA or FEMA, we partner with these agencies. And so we've always been in that mode to try and reach people where they are. And the pandemic was a disaster in itself, or at least parts of it were, and were a catalyst for us having to accelerate what we had already been working on, which was making sure, a decade ago, we extended the in-person experience of people walking in to our centers for help with employment, for help with all of the things that surround employment, like transportation, clothing, books, food, all those other things that we help make sure that they have. They're used to doing that, but not everybody could do that because they didn't have childcare, didn't have transportation, or were working perhaps during the same hours that we were and couldn't come. So we asked them first, why do you come to Goodwill versus other places? What causes you to walk in? And they told us three things. One, and first and foremost, we care and we believe in them. That no matter what their circumstance is, if they want help and they are serious about work, we're going to help them. And that we don't think any choice they've made, any condition they're in is going to prevent them, and that they have intrinsic value just by being a person. So that belief and care was the primary. The second was that we had real jobs from local employers, and we were able to connect them for free to that. And so often when they're navigating other spaces, they weren't as trusted, or they weren't local, or they were something you had to pay for, or they just weren't sure about it. So we're a trusted place for those local jobs with real employers. And third was that we had the training and the resources available to them, and made it the path of least resistance. We made it easy for people. And so we tried to figure out how we could replicate those three reasons people walk in into a virtual experience. And we had careerconnector.org, to the extent that we possibly could, phased in to supplement, to recreate those things. So we did things like live chat and live coaches because first they need to know we care. That's why they come. So how do we create a caring environment? It creates a personal touch. And how do we have the real job? So and people knowing, so we had vetted, these are local jobs in your community that match your interest. And we did more screening than the usual. And we're not for profit, and we're not trying to sell them anything. So they could trust that those were partners of Goodwill who were really looking. And then we would have things like a scroll that would celebrate when somebody went to work, or they needed encouragement from going to work, and they could ask for it and receive it from each other in this collective thing. And that had already begun a decade ago. When the pandemic hit, we were faced with same thing that so many educational institutions and workplaces were faced with. That is, first, are we going to close our doors? We closed our stores for 7 weeks. We closed to walk-ins for 7 weeks. But we kept all of our in-person job training participants with a lot of PPE and protection because I felt this was a safer choice. We had a lot more infrastructure to the alternative of people who were actively in training, getting paid, not being able to do that, are going to make other choices that may not be so wise. And we kept our virtual services going. And because we had some setup, all of one virtual job fair that we had done totally virtual on a new software platform, and all of one Zoom room technology setup like I have here, we were the leader because we had done one. And so our peers quickly heard about what we were doing. And so we helped them, and we became business to business behind the scenes, helping our peer nonprofits, peer governments, extending this virtual experience. And that snowballed into us creating more virtual, but keeping that caring in-person touch, because we're also very data-driven. And we know that people who do the live synchronous learning only, the virtual only about a quarter of them go to work that we serve. And our benchmark is from enrolled, so we are agreed, you're motivated to work, we're going to help you, to employed. Not graduated, as some people measure. As you finish the program, now do you go to work? But we're from the moment we're with you, we're invested in you. So virtual only about a quarter, which is akin to what most people can do on their own in the marketplace, right? Just on your own, you're probably going to get a job if you try. If we add just one in-person component, just one, it goes up to more than 50%, about 53%, and this is for very high barrier folks. And if you do the full comprehensive model of what we're doing, which is intensive case management, barrier removal with those work supports that people need, making sure that in their plan that we start with them in the beginning, we are identifying what is in the way and we help provide it. That we have employer-driven skill training with industry recognized credentials. So employers are telling us what they need before we ever begin, and we pay them for the times that they're practicing and doing work-based learning. So they are practicing those skills, because especially for adults and for some young people who are opportunity youth, neither connected to school nor work, they need to have pay because they can't make the choice between school or work. They just simply can't survive. So we pay them. But if all those things are in place and we have virtual instructor, everybody else is in person at least some of the time, but we have virtual instructor, we are getting the top of our outcomes, which is as high as 93% served to placed ratios. And we know too, once we get them employed, that they're going to maintain their job. We measure it by a year benchmark. Are you still employed? At above 70%, which beats industry average for people that just in general, but people that we serve in particular. And so data told us this works. You can do virtual instruction, live synchronous instruction, as long as the rest of that model is in place. that we meet our minimums, which for us are 65 to 70% or better, period, the end. We'll kill a program if we don't do that because we don't want to set people up to participate in something that we're not good at. But in that high range of 80 to 90%, and as high as 93 for our most successful programs. So that's why and what, and it's snowballed into a national thing now.
So I'll add to that. In my previous role, SNAP Employment and Training is a national program. It is administered by USDA, and the law requires all states to actually operate one of these programs. And quite simply, the goal of SNAP ENT is to help folks that are receiving SNAP benefits to gain the skills and experience that they need to secure employment and down the line, obviously, become self-sufficient. And the way that we do this, the way that we have advised states to do this now for over 20 years, is for state nutrition agencies which operate SNAP programs not to reinvent the wheel, but to partner with organizations that are experts in workforce development to disseminate the services to SNAP recipients. And that is where the partnership with Goodwill of North Georgia comes in. They are partners in the state of Georgia with the state, and they are the ones that actually deliver the services to the population. But more broadly, one of the issues that SNAP ENT faces around the country is that, states don't necessarily have much of a problem finding partnerships like with Goodwill in metropolitan areas. But there are vast swaths of the country that are very rural. And even though the state might take that advice and might seek these partnerships to deploy those services, there are just not enough of them spread into rural communities. So prior to the pandemic, we had been advising states to be flexible because there's a lot of inherent flexibility in SNAP Employment and Training to try and consider digital delivery of content. And I remember before the pandemic, one of the conversations that I had with Jenny was whether or not, and I was having conversations with the state of Kentucky, whether or not it was feasible to talk to public broadcasting to see if digital literacy could be broadcast through public television in the states as a way of sort of bridging that divide, that gap. And those folks could receive SNAP Employment and Training participation credit. And those conversations started, but at the time, there really wasn't that national impact of the pandemic. And that for us within SNAP Employment and Training really is in itself a silver lining because states took the advice and they would try to explore it, but they really did not have a lot of push, a lot of motivation to actually go that extra little bit to make that happen. When the pandemic hit, a lot of those flexibilities started coming in that previously the program, would not consider, things like being able to provide a tablet or a laptop, or be able to provide a portable hotspot so that if you did not have internet and you needed to participate in the program, that you actually had connectivity. Those things happened as a result of the pandemic. And more of these programs switched out of necessity from being sort of brick and mortar participation to virtual participation. And it was right around the time that Jenny and her team started considering this water delivery of services. And we really took advantage of that and really promoted it to the states. And I think that it has been, fairly successful here in the state of Georgia. We were able to convince the state to actually purchase laptops that could be loaned out, right, while you participated in the program. And then after you graduated or you completed, then that would be assigned to somebody else. And a lot of states actually implemented those programs. Some states actually just actually gave those technologies to participants. They didn't just loan them out, but they actually said, if you're going to participate in this program, we will actually give you the tablet or the laptop with the connectivity to go along with it. So it has been a really, really good partnership and a perfect silver lining for the conversation that we're having today.
So I'll jump in and make a comment. This isn't a cost, it's an investment, right? Because if you look at economic development, having these kinds of success rates with people who have been marginalized and with people who are in positions where they don't have a livable wage is so important. And it's an interesting contrast to higher education, because one of the things that tends to be true about much of higher education is that people spend a lot of money and they come out without a lot of skills that mean anything in the workforce, and often end up severely underemployed and with a lot of debt. And it just seems as if higher education wants to get better, and if it wants to justify its cost so that it becomes the investment that families hope that it will be, as opposed to just an expensive way of having fun when you're an adolescent, then they should be looking at models like yours. So that's a comment. Now I'll ask a question. It just seems, particularly for this population, that motivation is essential. That you can have everything else can be great, and if the motivation isn't there, it's going to not work, because these are people who've been marginalized by society. They've, in many cases, incorporated inappropriate beliefs about themselves into their own mental framework. And so having somebody that believes in them, that encourages them to believe in themselves, becomes really, really crucial. I'm wondering to what extent, if any, you use your alumni as a resource, because there's a kind of street cred to seeing somebody who looks and a lot like you and comes from a similar background to you. 2 years out, they're very happy with their career and their life, and it sort of complements the instructors and the coaches and the other staff within the program. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So you're spot on, as usual, Chris. We know that return on investment is so much more than what you know from your heartstring, seeing someone's changed life. Like you feel it, you literally feel it. But there's data that shows as well. One of the people that I learned from, Ray Bishop, who was our CEO for 27 years, talked about it in the terms of taking somebody with high potential, who has already had a great deal of benefit in their life. Privilege is the word people use now, but somebody who graduated high school, had all of the things that their parents, two parents in the home, were able to invest in them, and helping them with additional education and training to reach more of their potential. Where they're going to be, the circumstances they were in, to where they go, does have a return on investment, a calculable one, that they're going to be better off. We know this, that education and training, even a little, finishing high school will get you $500,000 in lifetime earnings greater. Doing some college, another $500,000. Finishing a bachelor's degree, another $500,000. Finishing a graduate degree, another $500,000. It's just science, data. We're looking back over time across all groups. But if you take somebody who has everything stacked against them, still the same potential within inherently, and what they bring to the table, but perhaps they're incarcerated or they're receiving public benefits, they are a tax recipient. And the circumstances that they live in are actually quite expensive. It's much more expensive to live in poverty than it is to not, because of the things that you have to do, interest rates and fees and fines and all of those kinds of things. It actually costs quite a bit more than somebody who has good credit and who has some means to do things. But if we can move that same person with the same potential, just with the circumstances that they're in, that life dealt them, or that they made choices to get into, either way, it doesn't matter to us. When a person moves from unemployed, perhaps unhoused, perhaps with support from the government, to employed, you not only are moving their potential, you are saving tax dollars And not only that, they become taxpayers and they become self-sufficient. They cost less on our health systems. They're not going to the emergency room. They have health insurance because that comes with a job in the United States. And so they get preventive care. And so managed healthcare organizations are moving into workforce development and are very interested in talking to us because they know that the people with the highest 20% of barrier and healthcare costs are mostly people who are unemployed or unhoused because of mental health issues or that kind of thing. And if we can get them housing and work, they will cost a lot less. And I say that, I said that in front of a large group of people, and in the audience was a very prominent managed healthcare organization, and they said, well, we also want to save people's lives. And I said, yes, I'm sorry, yes, of course, that's your first and primary, we all do. But to your point about alumni and that return on investment, somebody who's moved in that delta who can tell you, this is where I was, and this is where I am now. That's the heart you feel. You know, from a calculus standpoint, we have all the data that shows, the savings in reducing recidivism and how much it costs to keep someone in prison versus they're out working and productive citizens, safe citizens. We have the data, but you feel it when somebody says it. And I can say all day long, I'm very passionate. You can tell by the way I talk about what we do. Nick is too. But I'm a white girl who grew up in less than a middle class, working class, but now I'm an executive. And so they have skepticism unless I am open up my own personal story and share more things that are vulnerable, it's still though, it's not going to resonate with some people. So not only do we have an alumni association, people who have graduated and come back and come with me to sit at tables of power to tell their story, but also to recruit and help others. We hire the people we serve and we promote them into leadership positions. And we have people who serve on our board of directors. And so people look at our agency and ask how they can also, if they're serving many people of color, women in non-traditional occupations, how do you do that? That is one of the keys that we have. Our CEO is an African-American man. Our board of directors is majority women and majority minority. And our executive team and our leadership teams are reflective of the people we serve and often are the people we serve because you're not just getting worker voice. They're in charge now, and they were a participant in the program. And they know for sure what it took to get there and what the barriers were and what the community feels. And having them in charge is an entirely different proposition versus only hiring people who are homogenous from one group and all have a master's degree from, or PhD from somewhere. That's a different perspective. And despite our very sophisticated, and we work really hard on reaching people every which way we can, spend a lot on advertising. We do, very formal omni-channel campaigns, and, people come to see us too. We're proud of that, how we reach SNAP recipients. Number one, word of mouth. Number one to accessing our services is word of mouth, and word of mouth requires somebody to want to talk about what they did and that they're going to compel you. Our net promoter score, we call it, is, of course, there's a term. Would you recommend this as a place to go for your family or friends? That's a question we ask. And that needs to be a high score because that is the reason people come to us, is somebody told them about it, not because they saw an ad or we served them a digital Google page or, we do those things, but, or we sent them a postcard or we called or, we reached every which way we could. The number one way is somebody who's been through the program who told them about it later.
And if I may just add a little color commentary to what you were talking about, those alumni networks and those, the power of those stories is something that doesn't just encourage people to participate in the program and to follow through and to expand programs like the ones that Jenny's talking about, but that also works the other way. It works towards government to improve the perception of the program, the services, and to build momentum around how can we improve these programs to do better. The previous Deputy Undersecretary, Brandon Leps, if I may invoke his name, is very famous for that. He came to one of Goodwill of North Georgia's programs, and I think it was non-traditional occupations for women, where he saw for the first time on the ground what these programs actually do. You know, there's a lot of misperception out there that these types of programs only perpetuate dependency, right? That they're all about perpetuating dependency. He came out of that visit. I was lucky enough to accompany him to the visit here, completely transformed. And then he started traveling to other states and other programs. There's a program in Alabama that he actually went to the graduation for, where again, alumni that come from very, very, low beginning points in their lives talk about how transformational this program was and what it has done for them. He was very famous before, the change of administrations. He started talking about being a hope dealer, because at one of those graduations at a program in Alabama, a person had explained how they had a criminal background in the past and they dealt in drugs, and that through this program, they were now dealing in hope. And Brandon took that as his own message, and everywhere around the country that he went, not only did he repeat that story from that alumni, but he embodied that his mission was to spread hope. He was a hope dealer. And I think that it is beneficial to us in government to be able to sort of get that message and feel empowered, right? That we're not pigeonholed into these monolithic programs, but that we can think out of the box. We can expand those flexibilities, and we can encourage from within.
And I'll give him more credit to Brandon Lips and to Nick, because Nick was working hard to say, we can go one by one, because you have to do it from the top down, from the grassroots up, and everybody in the middle to make it work. You have to. And Nick kept asking his national office, could we figure out a way for these regulatory, it has to be a state-driven or county-driven in some cases, program. Is there a way we could have some national partnerships? And Goodwill's one example. There's many examples, and ultimately it turned out that way, and was just, relentless. And it was Brandon Lips who saw, heard, and didn't just say hope dealer, but he created the National Partnerships Grant to expand partnerships among the Goodwill movement. And that was one of the catalysts for this co-op model that we became we were already an intermediary for Georgia and providers in Georgia, but we became a technical assistance provider nationally for SNAP ENT as one of the first four during a pilot, whatever the last administration before the one that's about to end was, so 9 years, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, I don't know. And no, it was 6 years ago. And we realized as Goodwills were coming out of the pandemic, they weren't recovering. We went from more than 250,000 people collectively that we were serving, because Goodwill's a federated separate model, but we all report up to our association. More than 250,000 people we were helping to go to work every year, to half that. And we recovered in Georgia, and our sister Goodwill south of us in Columbus actually did better during the pandemic by adopting the model that we used in Atlanta to some extent, but also because they're fabulous. And it was the epiphany of having this setup behind me. We had one. And I had gotten a tour with our technical college president. She's very, Atlanta Technical College, Dr. Victoria Seals, was bringing the community in to say, this is how we're recovering, this is what we're doing. And I'm like, oh, hey, you have the same thing we do. Is that it's a Zoom room? You like the bevel? Do you do how, And she's like, oh yeah, it's a game changer. We didn't have an anatomy and physiology professor here, so we're using the Chattahoochee Tech has two. So they're beaming it. I'm like, hey, wait, we have co-enrollment. We partner with the technical colleges to make it the path. People come to Goodwill, and we slip in that it's college because they come to with us. And could we? She's like, sure, you're a satellite campus for us, as long as they're enrolled, and you make sure they're enrolled when you pay for their tuition. We'll connect. You got the same Zoom room, of course we can. I'm like, oh, and that was my first thought of. We had already been doing it from, our location. So from Duluth, Georgia to Woodstock, Georgia, we were starting to have the virtual instruction broadcast with the other model. And then I said, oh, the college. Oh, so we can do it outside our organization. And we can bring these services. And so many Goodwills, as Nick said, were in rural communities where they don't have the technology in the Zoom room, but they had fabulous people working who cared, and they had programming. And so I thought, well, if we can do it from Duluth, Georgia to Woodstock, Georgia, why can't we do Duluth, Minnesota to Woodstock, New York? We're all Goodwill, and we all have all these partners, these federal, state, county partners, these other nonprofits who do housing, food, and some Goodwills do it themselves, some partner. So we figured out how to do it amongst ourselves. We should do it everywhere. And so I went to my peers at one of our national conferences and said, hey, I have an idea. What do you think? Could we start serving people together? Because Goodwills are assigned territories and we never cross over into each other's world, but virtual world is it. It's the world. And they said, yeah, but how would we do that? And I said, I don't know, let's figure it out. And we began co-creating with about 30 other Goodwills and mapped it all out, doing design thinking and, follow the journey of the job seeker and the employers and everybody with their experience with us. And how might we do this? And we didn't let perfect be the enemy of good, so we just started. We're just like, let's just do one and figure it out. Like, see what doesn't work. We'll do it small because we're gonna mess it up. So just a few people who are willing, just like a study, who are willing to know that they're guinea pigs. And we're gonna try this and see. And we figured out where the friction points were, where the pain points were, and then we iterated, we got better, and then we added more different things and more other Goodwills. And now I'm delighted to say that we're doing it for the first time in Goodwill history, and we're ready. Now Goodwill Industries International is gonna jump in to help us with the data sharing, which is a huge friction point, and the how we count. In the past, we all just served a person and said we served him. Now it's going to be a duplicated count, which is 2 Goodwills serve the person. So all those kind of things, and the money and the credentials from one state to another, all that stuff we had to figure out. But we're figuring it out.
In all those cases, as I was saying earlier, that now within the program, we now allow states to actually issue laptops and tablets, and those MiFis sort of brings in that other piece of the puzzle, so that certainly a state could partner with Goodwill of North Georgia, even though they're not physically in their state, and become part of the overall program to deliver content to their population. But colleges in general, colleges can be encouraged to go ahead and just broadcast classes, technical classes, either to somebody's home, right, if they have access to the technology and a laptop, or, they could broadcast it and somebody can go to the local public library, to be able to have that accessibility and try to bridge that gap, right, that barrier of transportation, living in rural areas. Those people can then have the opportunity to, really benefit from the digital economy. They're not necessarily have to travel to a big city or a large town to actually secure employment. They could potentially do it from their home or someplace close by. So it's been really transformational.
Exactly, and that's here in the Big Ten. They call it course share. They have an entity called course share that most faculty don't know about. And actually, a quarter century ago, I created a little entity called Course Share, trying to promote this notion of sharing courses and all this kind of stuff. We have about 8-9 minutes before we need to introduce the next show. I have a couple of things. Nick, if you could, and I'm going to go to Jenny for the longer question, but Nick, if you, for our listening audience, could explain the history of SNAP in 30 seconds and your concerns about SNAP, given we're not a political show, but we always hear about programs being cut. And that's the one that's always mentioned. Are you worried about that? And what is the outlook like for SNAP? Just in a nutshell. Then I'll go to my longer question.
Well, SNAP is the nation's premier nutrition program. It is there. It has been there for decades to help low-income individuals in their time of their greatest need to be able to get help to put nutritious food on the table. And it works as intended. When things are bad, obviously participation in SNAP goes up. When the economy is good and folks are fully employed, their SNAP rolls actually diminish. So it is a very responsive program, and I'm very proud to work within SNAP. I've been working in public assistance programs for 31 years. And in that span of time, Kurt, I've had the opportunity of being privy to many transitions of administrations, both at the state level when I worked for state government and of course at the federal level. And we all know as government employees that transitions from one administration to the other bring change. Right? And sometimes, sometimes we might have a bit of a hint as to what that change is going to be. Sometimes we don't. And we are an apolitical agency. We do the work as required by law for our programs, and we do it to the best of our ability. Is there concern? I think that there's always concern when there's a transition. Change is always sometimes difficult, but change can also present opportunities and be transformational. So I think that, we're just holding steady as she goes until, we get more firm direction of what the priorities are going to be. And then we're just going to continue doing the best for the American people that we can and helping to put nutrition food on the table. So
I had to ask that because we have people who are going to be listening to the show while they're jogging the trails or riding their bikes, and they're probably having that question in their head right now as well. And they might listen to the show a couple of years from now and have that question yet again. So this is, very important answer. But I'll go to the longer question. Again, we, only have about 6-7 minutes left. We're doing okay. But Jenny, you've really talked about a transformation, and both of you have talked, Nick as well, talked about a transformation in education at Goodwill. And you talked about upskilling and reskilling. And you talked about the laptop program. So our show for the past couple of months have been emphasizing AI. So have you been thinking about or implementing any kind of upskilling and reskilling ideas, programs, initiatives that involve new and emerging learning technologies, whether it is video conferencing we just talked about, or it might be AI in education? What kinds of things should we look to Goodwill as a provider of interesting pilot programs today that might make impact in other places in the future, or in turn might cause Goodwill itself to rethink their delivery mechanisms and their goals? So that's a long-winded question, but there's a lot there to catch on and grab at. You don't have to grab the whole thing, just a piece. And why don't you take the first stab, Jenny, and then we'll see how much time we have left and go to Nick.
Yeah, brevity to tackle that whole question would take even an hour, so another hour. So yes, is the short answer. If we weren't, we would be behind already. How Chris and I met actually, or one of the first conversations we had was about AI and thinking about what it meant for people who were in largely routine and repetitive employment that we're training people for, that are not going to be obsolete, but are currently obsolescent. So we are preparing people for work and for the work of the future now and in the future, because we want a long-term career path. And so we were beginning to see and already experiencing some jobs going away that we were training people for. And so how might we prepare for the future where jobs that require reckoning, low judgment, routine repetitive tasks would probably go away? And there's people with cognitive disabilities, people with very significant mental health issues, people who have limitations. Those are some of the jobs that were the low-hanging fruit and bread and butter. So how might we still make sure that they could continue learning and get the skills that they needed and use their innate human qualities? And use intelligence augmentation, which is a term that Chris helped me to understand, to lean in more heavily, that we could assess people on judgment, empathy, those innate qualities that no machine yet is going to replace and in industries that require personal attention and care. There are just some things that we needed to be able to do. So how do we assess it? How do we focus on it? How do we amplify and help people to use those innate human qualities for future jobs that we don't even know will be coming into existence, but we know which ones are going out. So from that standpoint, that's been on our mind, and thinking about where the things will be sunsetting and where we need to pivot to help. And also we have partners with wonderful partners like Google, who has gifted their AI fundamentals course through Coursera to all of Goodwill Industries International team members and the people that we serve, so that we can dispel some of the anxiety and fear about just what is it? It's agnostic. It's not Google's products. It's just all AI. What is it? What does it do? How could you use it? How can you improve your own utilization of it and your own effectiveness and efficiency by using it? And what we're not quite at, Cyberdyne Systems, where, don't be too afraid yet of Terminator, coming. Though, some of you see the skeptics are like, we want people to take those courses so they know what it is at this point. Where are we and where are we rapidly cycling? So those kinds of partnerships are very valuable to us, to have the support of the tech community, to have employers like Microsoft and Google and IBM, Cisco, have all leaned in because they recognize the return on investment and the cost that we have of helping people, and we're good for both sides of the aisle, so I'm a little less worried because, people have hiccups in their life and nobody wants children to starve in America. I haven't heard anybody say children should starve yet. So we're probably going to have some form of SNAP benefit, at least for children, and for a little while, hopefully. But what we all universally believe in that, and we also know right now the regulation is that people only who are in the term serving people with disabilities, I balk a little bit at, but able-bodied adults without dependents, which, some people who aren't able-bodied can work too, because, that's just a term. Anyway, you can only get 3 months of SNAP benefits without working or going to school or volunteering or meeting a number of things anyway. And I won't wade into policy because I'll say it wrong. And I've got like an expert next to me who's smack me and say, not that one, Jenny, gently, verbal smack. And we needed these kinds of AI, intelligence augmentation, and tools to be able to continue to help people move to self-sufficiency who have those hiccups. And we are one of the remedies for that, to help people. It was Brandon Lips was under the Trump administration the last time. And so I'm hopeful. I am hopeful that we as citizens will continue to take care of people in survival, to move them to stability and success, and not just leave them there. And we all, people want to take care of themselves and their families.
So we still do have 2 or 3 minutes, Nick. You want to jump in and add something to that?
Yeah,
We did start early though, so we have to make sure that's right. So we started a couple, so go
So
ahead.
I'll try to be very brief. On the AI side, because we provide oversight for these programs at the national level. Our work with AI does not go all the way down to ground level where Jenny's services are delivered. But we are having conversations about how can we advise our states to use AI to help with the administration of these programs to make it less burdensome for them. There is a lot of administrative burden that comes with these programs, and states struggle sometimes to be able to meet all those responsibilities. So how can we use AI? It's funny that Jenny mentioned Google, because Google also has a pilot in the Atlanta area that is using AI and technology to be able to provide a census of resources and connecting that to workforce. One of the things that is a challenge for SNAP ENT practitioners in states is that they might be aware of agencies like Jenny's, if they work in the Atlanta area, but that's basically all that they know. But AI could provide a more comprehensive list of what the resources are so that they can create more meaningful work plans and independence plans for the folks that they are serving. So that could potentially be another use of AI that the agency could support and promote into states.
Before I introduce the next show, Chris, Lydia?
Well, as always, we run out of time before we run out of discussion, but Many podcasts have as their goal to inform. We set ourselves a higher standard. We try to inspire. And this has been very, very inspirational. We're grateful to you as guests for sharing the really important work you're doing and for inspiring others. We hope that this podcast will inspire some people to reach out to Goodwill in general and ask how they can help, ask how they can be part of this really important movement. So thank you, and thank you for what you do. Kurt, do you want to talk about next Saturday, the 14th of December?
Sure. We have episode 216 already. It's next week, Saturday at noon. Julie Lindsay of Southern Queensland Technology and Innovation Network will be with us, talking beyond borders, how to make online global collaborative learning work. She had an article in the Times Higher Education related to that topic, talking about how higher education strives to reset the age in the age of AI to become flexible, interdisciplinary, open, focused on real-world learning with authentic assessment. Curriculum embedded online global collaborative learning is the key to future-ready graduates. It sounds like a great follow-up to what we had today, and it sounds like Jenny and Nick will be attentive to and want the copy of that session. So again, thank you for coming this week. It's been a great show. Thanks, Chris, for bringing them in here. And I think we need to get more Goodwill people here in the future or related industries for Silver Lining for Learning. Thank you.